Data compiled by The Guardian found that 59 people in the US were shot and killed by the police in the first 24 days of 2015, compared to 55 people fatally shot by police in England and Wales in the past 24 years. Days versus years. Welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk, where we talk about things. Today we're going to be talking about police in America. We're going to be talking about reform, defunding, and abolition. And just to define each term, reform is about bringing in training, changing the laws, reforming how the police structure works. Defund is about taking the money away from the police and reallocating it to something else in the community. And abolish is about getting rid of the police system altogether. So to start off with reform, people have mixed opinions on this because of the idea that reform doesn't work. And I wanted to share a quote from this article written by a former police officer. Increased bias training. A quarterly or even monthly training session is not capable of covering over years of trauma-based camaraderie in police forces. I can tell you from experience, we don't take it seriously. The proctors let us cheat on whatever tests there are, and we all made fun of it later over coffee. Training only is effective, I think, if it is taken seriously. And I'm sure people do take this seriously, but this is an example of how easy it is to not actually take something as important as bias training seriously. So another quote I wanted to share around the idea of reform from his article is, "Tougher laws. I hope you understand by now cops do not follow the law and will not hold each other accountable to the law. Tougher laws are all the more reason to circle the wagons and protect your brothers and sisters." By reforming how the police structure already exists, it's difficult to change anything that already exists. I think we all can relate to the fact that change is hard. And unless we sometimes pull out the weeds and go into the root of the problem, you can't solve a deeply rooted problem by just adding things or changing small things. So I think that the biggest con against reform is it just doesn't work. That being said, I did want to share a positive aspect to reform. So in Camden, New Jersey, the local police department was disbanded due to police corruption and rising crime rates. The county now runs the department and implemented de-escalation training, defined chokeholds as deadly force, and required the officers step in if a colleague is using excessive force. Officers were tasked with patrolling on foot, introducing themselves to residents, and hosting community barbecues. Violent crime dropped 42% between 2012 and 2019. In comparison, the FBI estimates nationwide violent crime fell 9% from 2009 to 2018. The next thing I want to talk about is defunding. So I'm sure if you've heard anything about defunding right now, it is about reallocating resources. And to come to the root of it, I think we really need to understand why people commit crimes to begin with. Because if you understand why people do that, it can help understand where to put the resources in order to prevent crime and not employ people to catch crime. So there are a lot of ideas behind where these resources can go. And I wanted to share another quote from this article written by this former police officer. He says, "When I was doing my best work as a cop, I was doing mediocre work as a therapist or a social worker. My good deeds were listening to people failed by the system and trying to unite them with any crumbs of resources the structure was currently denying them." So I think that there are so many people who can deal with different crimes that aren't cops. And actually, something I thought of when doing some of this research was doctors. We have so many different types of doctors. We have doctors that work with our hearts. We have doctors that work with our brains, brain surgeons. We have doctors that help deliver children. We have doctors that, eye doctors, right? You can practice medicine in so many different forms, yet a police officer has to do everything. A police officer can give you a traffic ticket, but also stop murder. In a 2016 interview, former police chief David Brown stated, "We're just asking us to do too much. Every societal failure, we put it off for the cops to solve. That's too much to ask. Policing was never meant to solve all these problems." So I think the biggest takeaway with defunding is it's about understanding that police should not have to do everything, and on top of that, police is not the only answer to certain types of crimes. One area of concern I do want to bring up with defunding the police comes down to certain cities, because in certain places, police aren't paid that well. In Hillsdale, a suburb of St. Louis, Missouri, new officers earn $13.50 an hour after a probationary period, less than hourly workers at Target. Low wages force many officers to take extra jobs, leaving them tired and unprepared to deal with a high-stress police situation. We don't want police that aren't going to do a good job, right? So I think that is something that we need to think about as well when it comes to taking money away from the police department, ensuring that the police that are there are getting enough money to support the intensity of what they might have to do. So the last piece of the puzzle that we're going to talk about today is around abolishing the police. I think when you have a system in place for so long, it is hard to just restructure it right away. But what's important to recognize is that the current system isn't working. So I think that when it comes to abolishing, it will take trial and error. It might not work 100% well, but we can't expect it to, because the current system doesn't work 100%. So I think any fear around what that would look like is understandable and valid. My conclusion from learning about all of this is that there is not one size fits all answer to this. In terms of budget, cities have different budgets for the police, and I think that community members should have a say in what happens in their own city, because they're the ones living there, right? Like, how can I, as someone who doesn't live in Los Angeles per se, say, hey, you need to abolish your police force? Like, I can look at the stats and come up with that conclusion, but I'm not a member in LA. I will not be affected if there's police or not. But if someone is genuinely afraid for their life in LA and wants a police officer, then they should have control over the safety of the town they live in. I will link a pro and cons list that I took a lot from and even quoted in this video. It appears that these photo booth inserts are going to be a weekly occurrence. I really want to stress checking out the pro and cons list of defunding the police that I put in the YouTube video link, because there are points against some that bring up things that I hadn't heard before. For example, there's a piece that I'm going to share on the screen right now. Contrary to the publicly asserted war on Black people by white police officers, few are actually murdered by white officers each year. An analysis of the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania Police Department found white officers were least likely to shoot an unarmed Black person, with a threat perception failure rate of 5.2%. With Black suspects, Black officers had a 11.4% rate and Hispanic officers a 16.7% rate. Can I just say, I literally went to the article the report that they cited this from, and the stat is different here. They say 6.8% instead of 5.2%. Oh my, fact check. Good news is I think I found where they got the 5.2 from. Bad news is they displayed the information wrong. So learning right information is hard. If you feel pretty set on your side, for example, if you believe that defunding the police is what needs to happen, people who are debating against you might bring up something like that. So it's important to understand how to reply to other people on the other side quoting things like that. Please read the letter from the former cop. I think it is really incredible, especially because someone on the inside is admitting to what it was like being on the inside. I hope you learned something today and you're thinking a little bit about police and what you think the right thing to do is. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for your time and space. And join next week because we're going to be talking about restorative justice.